Tonight, there should be nothing common between Vishwanathan Anand and Elizabeth Gilbert. But as it turns out, there is. For one, both of them found that their real challenge began not before they became successful, but after it. Both of them found that they weren't just successful, but they became cult figures in their own worlds. And being a cult figure comes with its own set of expectations, disappointments, and opportunities. And curiously, both of them were born 4 months apart and turned 50 this year, which is a great place to ask for the midlife wisdom that they might have accrued. Vishwanathan Anand, when you think of chess, there are, give or take, over 800 million chess players in the world at this point, could be more. Of that, only 1,680 are grandmasters. Of that, since the World Federation of Chess started to formally hold world championships in 1948, give or take, there have been no more than 15 world champions, ever. Of that, Vishwanathan Anand has been a 5-time world champion. In a sport that nobody in this country often even played recreationally, let alone professionally, right? And yet, I mean, he became a grandmaster at the age of 18. The same year, he won the Padma Bhushan. He also then went on to win the Khel Ratna, which is India's highest sporting honor. He has won an absolute host of titles that we cannot list because there are too many to spend the evening on. And yet, not one of those titles is his real accomplishment. Because I think the real accomplishment of being Vishwanathan Anand is to be that young boy taking on a sport that nobody before him in this country had. And when asked by somebody, what do you want to be? He said, world champion. And then went on to do it. Therein lies a story, and it's a pleasure to tell that story, to invite on stage Vishwanathan Anand. Anand, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you on behalf of everybody for putting India on a map we never thought we'd be on.
Thank you very much.
And I don't want to start from the start, but literally from somewhere in the middle, which is to say, what does it take to try to become excellent without precedent? By which I mean to have the audacity to decide you want to be a world champion in something we had never even played professionally. Where does that come from?
Actually, the person who asked me that question is here with us, a friend of mine, Ashok Alexander. And I would say the answer I gave him is out of innocence. It felt like the answer I should give. I had no idea what it implied or what it meant. I simply gave it out. And I had some books of world champions in my library, and it just seemed like the sort of thing you should try. So.
You were 6 when you started to play chess,
Yes.
right? And your mother introduced you to it. Was it an immediate love affair, or did it kind of grow on you?
I think probably it was an immediate love affair. I started playing, and I kept at it for long enough that eventually my mother decided to go for the next step, which is to put me in a chess club. I can't see that really having happened unless I seem to keep going back to it again and again. I don't remember that period extremely well, but it must have hooked me.
And what about chess, if not then later? What about chess was addictive? So I can understand starting, I can understand keeping at it for a while, but what kept you going back for clearly now over 4 decades?
I would say it's probably the sensation of learning something new. Chess turns out to be one of these games where no matter how many times you think you've figured out some kind of rule, there are exceptions, and you need to keep on learning new stuff. The other thing is, especially if you're a 6 or 7-year-old, the chance of outwitting an opponent is quite irresistible. So,
and when did you decide? Were there interim goals? As a 6-year-old, you said world champion. When did you realize that between then and world champion, there would be many, many goals? What were those kinds of goals that you set for yourself?
I can't remember thinking in terms of goals at that age. And the World Championship was so far away that that was too abstract. But the main thing I found was simply I liked going to the chess club. I was very, very regular. I'd go every Monday, every Thursday evening, and then spend the whole of Sunday at the club. And I would rearrange my school. I'd do everything else so that I could do this. And when the club started to have weekly chess tournaments, I signed up for all of them. That's what I did. Then I had this breakthrough year when suddenly I got much better and broke through a lot of things. But until that point, actually success was sort of elusive. I was doing decently, fourth, fifth in most competitions. But so when I finally, in this 2-month period when I started winning everything, it must have surprised me as well. I hadn't thought about goals until that point, but then suddenly the international master title came into view, so that became something to aim for. And after that finished, well, the Grandmaster title was the obvious, maybe the first real goal that I was working towards, because no one in India had ever been.
Will you just explain to us what does, I know that, I mean, there's a technical kind
Yeah.
of description. What does it mean to be a Grandmaster? What entitles you to be called Grandmaster?
Okay. So basically, there are certain rules. You play in a tournament with a certain number of nationality, I mean, certain number of federations represented, a certain average rating so that the tournament has something. And you make what is called a Grandmaster performance, which is a 2,600 performance. I mean, it's just a number, but anyway, so the 2,600 performance. And if you can do that over 24 games, then you got the title. And when I started trying for the title, I kept on missing. So in effect, I was doing something like a 25-90 performance again and again, but I kept missing the goal for 2 years. But when it finally happened, then it was
And
smooth.
you were what, 17 then?
16 when I started trying for it, and I just finished my 18th birthday when I got my first norm, and then 2 weeks later I got my second, so I clinched the title then.
And, you know, one of telling stories about what goes into winning, often it's hard to convey the absolute everyday dullness, deadness of routine that it takes to arrive at those moments. Will you tell us what an average day, both before then or say during your 4-decade career, what does an average day or week look like that you repeat over and over again?
Well, my average day has evolved, and it typically depends whether I'm at a tournament or right before a tournament or a long way away. So at a minimum, I tend to pick up a chess book, and I think I've done this every day of my life. I'll pick up a chess book, see what's happened recently, just go over some games. This is the equivalent of studying something without feeling the pressure to do an exam on it. You know, just flick through stuff, and you read something, you find it interesting, move around. That I think I've probably done every day except when I was trying to get away from chess. Then before a tournament, it's slightly more structured. You're looking at the games of your opponents, trying to get an intuitive feel for what I mean, when you sit at the board, you should be able to anticipate some of their responses. You should be able to guess what they're going to do. And as much information as you have, you'll make a better guess. And then this multiplies enormously when I was playing for the biggest titles or aiming for something. So training camps, always much more intense, but they were dispersed through the year. But most of the time, it looked like this. And for the last many years, my typical days: wake up, have some breakfast, do my physical training, fitness regime, and only start working after lunch. So that's been my schedule for many, many years now.
You know, one of the things about sport like chess, and we had Abhinav Bindra here a couple of years ago, and I think also with shooting, you often don't think of these as physically rigorous in any way, right? And yet, just stamina, for instance, or just building up that resilience. Is there a lot that goes in physically, not just mentally and psychologically, to being a professional sport player, no matter what the sport?
Yes. I mean, simply put, playing chess has physical consequences for me. I mean, my muscles feel tired. I feel very tense. You know, my neck stiffens and all that. So all the physical manifestations of exhaustion come through. Um, and recently, they have started to show that your heart rate goes up and stays up for a long time, that you burn a lot of calories. I mean, it seems to be kind of speculative, but at least it seems to be pointing in that direction. So yes, it is physically very demanding. I think it's become more so recently because the nature of the game has changed. We have more and more games played, faster time controls. I mean, it
What's
starts
the
to look.
longest game you've played? Like, what's
Okay, in the days when games could be paused, adjourned, and then continued on another day, I have played up to 15 hours for one game over 3 days. But that is no longer even possible. So the longest game possible nowadays is 7 hours, and I've done that on many occasions. The shortest game I ever did was, I think, about 20 minutes. Just a blunder decided the game. So that's
was the
one-off.
blunder yours or the other person's?
One of mine, which I lost immediately. So my main aim then was to resign as quickly as possible and disappear before anyone realized what was happened. And the other one was after 35 moves, I beat a Grandmaster. But that was the fact that I knew the whole variation, so I didn't have to think at all. And he taught the entire 35 minutes, and then he resigned. So, so.
I'll come to some specific games I'd love to talk about, but first, just to what it takes mentally and psychologically to be a chess player. For one, it seems to be, or is it, a lonely game? Do you have to turn inward a lot? And is that, do you know a lot of extrovert chess players, for instance?
Well, I would say both. I know chess players who are perfectly extrovert and they're able to, they enjoy conversation and all that. They like to go out there, meet people. But even when they're thinking about the game, they can get lost in it for a while. Obviously, they get lost in it less. And I know chess players who never come back. I mean, they go into the game and they're completely lost in it for many, many years and never quite. I think the rest of the world just feel like something that's constantly interrupting them, and they really live and breathe chess.
Was that your relationship with chess? Did reality seem to intrude on chess?
There are moments when it felt like it, and my mother would always hide any chess magazine that came in the mail till I'd finished lunch or dinner because she knew that if I got the book before that, it'd be very difficult to get me out. But I don't see myself as one of the as someone who doesn't enjoy life outside of chess or something like that. But there are moments when I'm thinking about a position and then, it seems to it bothers me if someone keeps on talking. So I can have that, but I would say briefly.
Temperamentally, I think you said somewhere that in a high-pressure game or in a high-stakes game, you often cease to be the person that you think you are or that you want to be. Tell us what you mean by that. What happens?
Well, basically, in a high-pressure situation, you either do things in a good way that you didn't think you were capable of, but unfortunately, it's equally possible that you do the opposite. You make moves that are simply inexplicable. And it's clear that this is caused only by the pressure, because 1 second later, when the pressure is lifted, you see everything clearly. But for that one moment, it's amazing how it's not that you have any sense of making a mistake. It's for that moment, all your thought processes are telling you you're doing things great, but you're doing things wrong. And something's short-circuited. And when you come out of that, you have to look at the wreckage and see what happens. And that's a problem because, in effect, what chess is about is putting your opponent in a situation where he's uncomfortable for long enough that happens. So it is something that will happen frequently.
So you've said that at the highest level, it's all won or lost in the mind, right? Are you saying that in ability terms, there's no real difference left? And so what does it take to win when it's in the mind? What are the attributes or qualities that you need to call upon at that time?
I would say that if the technical level is close enough, And there's always an imbalance. I mean, you might be good at something that your opponent is weak in, and your opponent might be good at something that you're weak in. But if you're roughly of equal level, then the game has to be won in the mind. And so what you're looking for is consistently to present problems, but especially if you can try to present the kinds of problems that your opponent feels uncomfortable in. I mean, every person has positions that they like playing, and things that certain kinds of problems that they feel very uncomfortable in. And even if you don't understand chess, you will recognize the player talking about it. I mean, someone will say that he felt very vulnerable when his opponent is attacking his king. Because, well, when you lose the king, the game is over on the spot, right? So defending that requires playing very accurately, no matter how many threats there are, calculating everything exactly. That's a kind of chess you play very briefly, but you may not like it. My weakness was the opposite end. If nothing seemed to be happening for very long, then I lose focus very easily. And I drift into making automatic default moves. And that way you can sort of drift into trouble. So this sort of thing, when you're doing something that you're uncomfortable in, that's where you typically start making mistakes.
So what's the kind of psychological training? Do chess players undergo psychological training? Did you? And what's the nature of that training?
I didn't actually go for psychology training to any sort of kind of specialist, but my thing would be if there's certain kinds of positions that bother me, then when we drew up the work list at the beginning for the whole team, we would all say, well, these kinds of positions I do very badly, so either we try to avoid them, or we have a training session at the end where, you know, we put these positions before me, and I'm forced to pretend that I'm at a game. So visualization. You sit there and you try to imagine what you would feel like at the board. But it helps if you have a playing partner who can make life as uncomfortable as it would be there. And if you can do that, then you really get the sense of what goes wrong. And you can try to work on it.
So you mentioned there's 2 or 3 things I want to come to, but at this point I want to mention that Anand just wrote Mind Master, and it's a memoir. But I think one of the fascinating things about it is that there are more probably lessons for non-chess players in there than even for chess players, because something that you just said, for example, the sense of putting yourself in the way of discomfort during preparation. We don't think of chess as a team sport. You mentioned your team. Tell us about the team, and did you consciously look for players who could challenge you? Because that's clearly the kind of training required. So instead of surrounding yourself with people who tell you you're doing fabulously, you essentially need to surround yourself with people who say you don't know much or what's going on, you know?
Yes, very much, because, and a related question I'm often asked is, well, if you're world champion, what can your coach teach you? And your ranking and your performance depends on your performance skills, but that often is just how well you cope with problems at the board, under the pressure of the clock, and without the ability to take back moves. But there are many more people who have huge skills that they're not able to capitalize on because they may lack the exact skills. But in a training camp, they can wipe the floor with you because they're just much stronger in some areas. So I think it's pretty natural that you look for people who can disagree with you or who naturally think in a different way from you. But nonetheless, every time I started working with a team, the first few days were annoying because it's annoying being contradicted. And I literally always would have one angry moment when everyone has gone to their room and I'm sitting there irritated. And then I would think, what am I having this camp for? It's to beat that guy. And why am I arguing with my seconds? And I would calm myself and work through this. And I found that a typical mistake I would do is if somebody suggested something, I would give my opinion and then find myself in the position of defending the opinion rather than trying to find the truth. So these guys, and then once you get to the moment when you get angry and you're slightly annoyed and you think through the problem, then the next day you can keep reminding yourself, when someone contradicts you, you think, okay, forget about what I think about this position. Let me see if he's right. And then you think for a while, and you try to understand. And at the end, if you force yourself to do things like this, um, either it opens your eyes to new possibilities, um, or at least you realize that you're doing something badly. But no matter how many times I've done this, the first day is always annoying because you've gone from being alone to suddenly working with a team. Equally, after 2-3 months together, we have a very good time. I mean, all of us get along very well, but no one's really unhappy to be going home because at some level we've had enough. We're maxed out, and everyone is looking forward to being alone for the next few months.
So, were you naturally competitive, or is that a streak you've had to develop?
No, I think I was naturally competitive. I mean, my parents always used to tease me for screaming when I was losing at cards with them. So I think it just runs in the blood.
And the reason I ask is because, at least externally, you have a very contained personality, right? So when you speak of irritation, annoyance, the need for, I mean, being naturally competitive, it doesn't externally manifest. Is that a strength you found when dealing with people who are more visible in their emotions while playing?
It goes both ways. I mean, I've also met people for whom this ability to show their emotions doesn't affect their level of play very much. But it's true, a lot of people think that I'm very calm, that I'm a very good loser, and so on. But it's just not possible. You cannot, I think, be a good loser. It has to annoy you at some level. But
What's been your worst reaction to losing?
Well, there have been a couple of times at press conferences where, I couldn't keep on avoiding it, and I would snap at someone. I remember the match I lost in Chennai. At some point, there was a Norwegian journalist who kept on pestering me. I mean, I kept saying, well, things are going badly, but I hope to do well in the remaining games. I'm going to go back and have a look. And he kept saying, what will you look at? I mean, he was obviously trying to needle me. And at some point, I said, I don't know if you understand English, but this is what I said. It didn't... I won't make the top 10 of chess players behaving badly, but at these
Who's
press
number
conferences,
one on that list?
Yeah, at press, I think probably Fischer should be on a few of them. Kasparov, Carlsen, I think these guys always have one or two moments there. But I'm also not enjoying it or even able to pretend. I'm literally, but I keep this zero emotion face because I'm literally breathing to get out. It's not in any way related to an ability to control my feelings, but I'm just dying for the thing to get over so that I can run.
So I want to come to a couple of particular matches, but starting with your first World Championship win, which was Tehran, right?
Yeah, right.
And you were 30. You were just... Did you was winning that, was there that particular moment when you felt, this is what I worked for? Was winning everything you thought it would be?
Yes, it always has been. I mean, whenever I have a big success, you feel that, finally you got this, and it feels wonderful. But I must say, the 15 minutes before it finally happens feel much better than 15 minutes after it has happened, because it's still much better before it happens. And it's in the future. Then it's in the present very briefly, and then it's already in the past. And it disappears very fast. 2 days after an event, I think I should be happier than this, but I'm not able to push it anymore. And it can die down very fast. And after that, it becomes a sort of quiet satisfaction for several weeks. But the euphoria is simply not there anymore.
And is it harder to come to a place where you are now defending the potential loss of this as an already champion? When there's that classic sense of having nothing to lose before you've won it and having something really to guard after you've won it. Did you go through that?
Yes, many times. At many points after the Grandmaster title, I think I've had this difficulty that till you adjust to your new situation, you can keep fumbling. But I think in my second wave, I 3 titles, 3 matches against, the 3 best competitors that I had at that time, and a 4th one right before that in Mexico. This whole period, I was defending titles, and I managed successfully. But even so, my performance graph goes like this. And my final title I won in the tie breaks, and the very last, in the narrowest possible way. So even if I managed to do it, the result was fine, but you could see that something is disappearing.
Did you, 2007 Mexico, and you won that championship, but already, and I think the 2007-2008 period when you were set up to play in Bonn in 2008 seems to be where it all kind of came together as both heightened accomplishment, but also heightened kind of sense of being challenged. Will you tell us about those games from 2007 to 2008, that period?
Sure.
And why did 2008 in Bonn, you begin your book with that game, right? Why is that championship so central to your entire 4 decades in chess?
So in 2006, the chess world, which had 2 federations for a very long time, reunified. And so for the first time, there was the title of world champion, as it used to be historically, which is undisputed, was on offer again. But I had the feeling that it had come so late that it might already be out of reach. I mean, when I went to Mexico, I myself would have had to place odds that I wouldn't be world champion rather than I would, because it's much easier to bet on the other 7 participants than yourself. Nonetheless, I had a good training camp. I was optimistic and all that. And we were also very happy to go to Mexico because we liked the country a lot. But it was only after the second game that I really felt happy, because I beat one of the toughest, in fact, probably in some people's eyes, the favorite, Aronian. And I beat him in a very, very nice game. And sometimes you just feel this, the wind blowing in the right direction. Your guesses are right. What you anticipate he will do, he does. You are unsure of something, you take a gamble, it turns out to be correct. Sometimes you just feel that everything is going your way. And Mexico had that feeling. My difficult moments in that tournament were draws. I was undefeated, and the good ones just went spectacularly. And a few months earlier, I had had a bad tournament, but I managed to fix all the problems right before the tournament after that, which was also in Mexico, and then 6 months later at the World Championship. So the tournament period, I became tournament world champion. And then one of the conditions for this was that I would have to defend the title against the previous champion, which was Kramnik, in a match. Anyone who would win that title would have to defend it. And when I played Kramnik, that was not a very happy pairing for me, because he was one of my toughest rivals always. But also stylistically, he's a very annoying player to play in a match, because it'd be very difficult to impose my style on him. It's much easier for him to impose his style on me, which meant I'd play the kind of dry technical position that I didn't like to play. And so right in the book, I describe this moment after the match where I told Aruna and my trainer Nielsen that I'm just going to play d4 because I don't want to sit and prepare the Petrov and the Berlin for the rest of the year. And Nielsen, he didn't really go one way or the other. And Aruna said, well, if you like it, do it.
And sorry, I just want to intervene to say the opening you always favored was e4, right? And you liken it to saying to switch to d4, which was his preferred opening, is like learning a new language. Like you know it, but to switch to playing in the other person's language, that's the nature of the risk you were taking when you made that decision.
Very much. That's a very good analogy, actually. It's like saying instead of the contract being in my first language, it can be in yours, and we'll go for it. But so I took that decision, but it probably was the best risk and the biggest payoff I've ever had. because my attitude is more crucial than the risk. I mean, I could have taken the decision to play d4, but and I felt this from inside. It's not something I had to think through and plan as a strategy. I felt this from deep within. I simply was so desperate to steer the game into the kind of play that I liked that I was willing to be almost reckless about it. And I took a lot of risks. We had to steer the game always to the most complicated, in the most complicated direction. And so I also told my entire team, look, we're going to work till the last minute on d4. And if at the last minute we think we made a bad decision, then I'll face the consequences, but there'll be no changing. So the analogy of kicking the ladder, I really felt that you had to go all in and you had to believe in this and play it. But that whole match, I have that sensation of simply wanting to play chess and being very excited to challenge him. And that gives you this kind of creativity and freedom that, well, nothing else really does. So, and it paid off spectacularly. In the third game, he walked into our favorite line. And this was a bullseye, but we couldn't have anticipated it. We had prepared one sharp line, but it seemed that it's almost offended him because, sometimes you look at a position with your judgment and you think, but this is rubbish, I can't. So he could have told himself, well, I'm going to bail out, I'm going to be cautious about it and go back home and check it and come back for the next game, all sorts of mitigating strategies like that. But it was literally like waving a red thing for a bull. Every time he lost control and he would charge at it, and in the complications, I got through. So I took a 2-point lead. And then in the sixth game, it became a 3-point lead. Against a player who at that time, we had played like 100 games, and he had an advantage of 2 points. I was leading by 3 in a single match of 6 games. I mean, so the first 16 years that we'd played with each other, we were about even, and then suddenly I'm 75% against him. So, yeah, I mean, that will always be the best match that I've ever played in my life. It's hard to see that it's going to break that.
How useful is ego, and how much of a deterrent is ego when you're playing at that level?
I think it's inseparable from you. I mean, it is what you bring to the table in the end. It's not the chess. You have to bring this belief that there'll always be a moment in a game when you will have to take a decision on your own at the board, something you couldn't have anticipated, something you cannot be prepared. You'll have to take a call. Am I going to take this chance, or should I back down? And ideally, you'll go with your objective feeling for the position. But once in a while, it should be about your opponent. This is wrong. I'm better in this position than he is. I'm going to manage this somehow. That's how you think when the successes come. Equally, when you fail, it's usually because of that. But in the most critical moments, you will lose, your nerves or your ego. Something inside will give. The mistakes won't come from only technical reasons. It's because someone is putting you in a situation where you're uncomfortable, he's almost pestering you. That's when you crack.
We're going to take 5 odd minutes more, but we will open it up for audience questions. Just letting you know, in case you have questions, we'll send mics around soon. But there's a lot we haven't been able to touch on, but I'd like to come to 2 particular aspects. One is, you've played with literally all the chess greats. Are there will you tell us of, say, a couple of memorable encounters with somebody like Kasparov, somebody, Karpov, but also of the others you played with? Who really kept you on your toes, whether it's psychologically or technically? Who did you say, I respected more when I got up from a match?
I think you respect them much later. But, well, when I first played Karpov, actually I first met him in the Olympiad. And I went and asked him for an autograph, and he said no. And then 2 years later, when I became a Grandmaster, he um, came up to me and spoke and so on. So I think the first time I did not appear on his radar, and the
Did you
second time,
remind him that he had refused you an autograph?
no, I told him that actually much later, and then he just smiled. But Karpov can smile out his way out of any situation. So, um, and then we had some my most difficult, my test of fire. The first candidates match I played was with Karpov, and that's when um, I worked with a proper trainer for the first time and all that. And it's very interesting what my trainer told me. He said, Karpov is not someone who has any plans of his own, but somehow he will sense what you're going to do next, and he'll make a move that makes that harder. So whatever you're trying to do, he will do something that tries to block it. I'd never thought in this way. I mean, the most natural is this thing, you look at a board and you think, what is it I want to do next? And you just follow that. But for that match, before every move, I had asked myself, what is it he thinks I'm going to do next? And somehow, it was a very interesting way of thinking. And so in that match, and subsequently, in subsequent years as well, I was able to use this idea very much. Karpov is someone, well, the bit of his personality I like the most is he could be incredibly hostile. He could, do any dirty trick, or he could have his team do any dirty trick on you. You could have all sorts of squabbles with him. But if you bumped into him at an airport, he'll act as if nothing happened. He's ice cold in this way. And I like this very much. So there's famous stories of him with Kochner and Kasparov. He had legendary fights. But there are always stories of them sitting and playing cards in a plane. So I thought that was his most interesting feature. Kasparov was always hot and cold. And I'll just quote Timon. He said that Kasparov is someone who can hold a grudge for 15 years. But Kasparov is actually a guy who couldn't keep holding his feeling at all. He's famous for the most number of photographs and videos where during a game he's, basically the evaluation of the game is on his face. Obviously, he's one of the greatest ever, so...
You say one of. Who do you call the greatest ever?
These days, usually people just say Fischer, Carlsen, or Kasparov, but it's difficult to narrow it down any further. Everyone has a preference, and that's it. But Kasparov could never hide his emotions. In fact, on YouTube, the favorite video of mine is me playing against him in Geneva, where he makes a blunder and he literally falls back in his chair, almost to the point where it seems the chair is going to fall back. And, everyone knows he's blundered, no? So, and after that, there were people like, though now much younger than me, Aronian, Nakamura, against whom there were years where I just struggled and struggled. But eventually, I sort of managed to figure it out and stabilize. So there are people who annoy you for years on end, and then one day it just ends, and you start playing normally against them.
So two more questions. One about technology in chess. And I think it kind of hit public consciousness when Kasparov took on Deep Blue and then won. But what role does technology play in chess? Is it, in fact, as big a deal to be able to beat a computer? Or is it often more difficult to beat an unexpected human being?
Well, we will never again beat a computer. That's
those days are gone.
Yeah, those days are gone. That already hasn't been true for about 15, 16 years, where any decent laptop would beat you. But now it's gotten unreal, and the best computers are performing 600, 700 points above the best players in the world. This is a greater gap than the best players in the world and somebody who's starting the game now. So the problem is they never tire, they never make a mistake, their level is so consistent for so long that...
they also never tip their chair back and nearly fall because they blundered.
No, that's the worst part. They can be in a lost position and they have no disappointment, nothing. But nowadays, the hard thing is finding some interesting idea of your own that hasn't been suggested by the computer. And when you get one of those, you feel so good.
And I just wanted to come to Indian chess. When you were the first Grandmaster, I think today there are 23, or are there more?
No, there are 65 now.
There are 65 Indian Grandmasters. That's amazing. And there's now, I think, 4 Indians in the top 100.
Yes.
You're still the highest among them.
I'm still the highest.
You're still the highest among. What excites you about Indian chess today?
Well, we have 4 Grandmasters under the age of 14.
Wow.
And so I mean, the average level is spectacular. They're all very, very strong. And I think because they're all competing with each other as well, so they'll push each other a lot. I'm really optimistic that one of them will become world champion.
I do want to ask, because you reference their age, one doesn't think of chess as being about age because it's not in the same ways as other sport physically rigorous. And yet, I was glancing down the list of the rankings. The 14 people above you at this point are all pretty much the youngest, or the oldest person is actually 15 or 20 years younger than you. Why is age such a big deal in chess? There is absolutely nobody born before literally the 80s on that list, and you're 1969, which is fantastic. Why does age matter so much in chess?
Well, it was always, even historically, it was clear that your ability to calculate variations got worse with age. But at a time when you could bring your experience and your technical skills to compensate, then it didn't matter so much. So age and even fitness didn't matter so much in those days, which is why 30 years ago, chess players could go out drinking and now they go to the gym. So it's because the nature of the game has changed. But now with the advent of computers and the game becoming more and more about calculation and less about judgment, so the scales have tipped completely. And that's why the average age is dropping as well. In 1983, the average age of the top 10 was 36. Now it's 22, and I'm included in this. So it's not very...
We'll open this up to questions. Do raise your hands if we could have some lights that might help. I see a question there. We'll just get a mic to you in a minute.
Have you had the chance to read Javed Akhtar's poem about chess?
No, I haven't.
If you haven't, okay. And he relates it to a certain amount of philosophy,
Okay.
in as much as, and also political satire to say, for example, why is it that a pawn, once he gets out of his home, can never come back?
Yes.
So have you thought about relating chess with actual life in terms of how we lead it? And what, for we do find a lot of correlation between the two.
Yes, I mean, partly because I experience most of life through chess, I often see the same kinds of struggles or quandaries that I encounter at the chessboard also repeat themselves in life. But what I decided in the end was that it's very hard to apply the lessons because I'm much better at chess. I mean, no, I train a lot to deal with chess questions. And without that same level of training, you can't bring so much rigor to your everyday thing. So this is to say that I find that I make hasty judgments, and when I'm in a bad mood or irritable, then I make very bad decisions. You know, also it can be trivial matters, it can be important, but or I like something and then I want to rush in. But I find that, you know, I'm training myself to reduce that, not do that in chess. And as for chess and life, yes, there are a lot of interesting connections, but equally there are a lot of bad ones. I mean, especially this habit of saying that any politician is playing chess against his rival who's playing checkers, or a very irritating term nowadays is that someone is doing three-dimensional chess. I have no idea what that means even. So it's very hard to imagine what a politician is doing with that. But so it can be misused, but But yes, I think there are a lot of situations where the way you deal with the problems in chess you can think of in life as well.
And I will say that one of the things that comes out in the book is precisely that without being any obvious lessons to take away, the kind of both temperament and strategic insight that there is will often answer to some of those circumstances. I see another question there.
Anand, I think most of us will never know what it's like to be one of the world's best in something. How do you keep yourself grounded in that situation? When you know that, even at this age, I know you kind of overplayed your age, but how do you keep yourself grounded and focused on still being among the world's best?
At this stage, I try to keep working and keep enjoying it. The most important thing, I think, is just the ability to learn new things. And this is driven a lot now by the computer because every position, it seems that we have something to know. Even the ones that you thought you knew inside out, there are new details you have to keep learning. So at some point, you have to shed this idea that you know something and you just sit there, you let the variations go, but you force yourself to understand why something is different. And this turns out to be all you need to keep abreast of developments at least. But if you don't do that, you fall back very fast. The problem is just when you become slightly weaker in one area, it's not that you can isolate the problem there. So if you have not followed the latest developments or you're not adapting to something, it's not like it'll only affect you there. It will affect your confidence before you enter the whole line, because what will I do if it comes up, so I'll avoid it. It affects your confidence. So it works backwards and starts affecting all other areas. So this constant work, I would say, is the main thing. And nowadays, I have the pleasure of enjoying chess without too much of the compulsion of I have to meet this target, I have to win this title or that title. I mean, if I win a title now, it's a bonus and I'm happy, but it's light. So I think I enjoy it much more now.
Thanks.
Thanks.
There's one right there.
Thank you. So I really want to ask something which might help me in some ways. So have you ever felt that, it is very, very monotonous for you to play it again and again, and what helped you really to get out of it?
It gets monotonous very often. You may not see it in that sense, but you'll get sick of chess at some point. And in the book, I mentioned two or three of them are crises, but also there are moments when things are going well, but still you feel that it's nice to take a month off. So there were two crises. One was in Dortmund 2001, and the second one was after the match in 2013. And in both cases, what I did, because I now had the prospect of a 2-month break, the first month I didn't look at chess because it felt traumatic to look at chess because of the disappointment. I wanted to be as far away as possible from it. And but at the end of the month, everything had kind of receded a bit, and I was able to come back and feel enthusiastic again. So that's the first step, that if you, monotony or disappointment, something, then you just give it some time. And I talk about how hobbies are good, because the mind is the one thing which never rests. You have to distract it. You cannot to recover. So if you do something else, then it switches your mind off from chess, and you recover. At tournaments, all you can do is try to hope that you play a good game. So if you play a good game, the memory of the bad one will recede. But usually, and so far in my life, that's been enough. That whenever I've hit a wall, then a long break, followed by trying to continue and come back after that, has been enough.
We'll take a question from a lady.
It's actually a non-chess question.
Sure.
So it's a very solitary game, and you play at that level. I read an acknowledgement recently by an author which said, "To my wife and children, this book would have been written 2 years earlier, but for them." So What role does family and friendships play in your life? Do you expect them to understand, to leave you alone, or do you expect, or do they, get you back involved in regular life? And how does this sit? How does family, what role does family and friendships play in your life?
Okay, so I would say it depends. I mean, some family members are very, very closely involved. There are other chess players for whom their family is, busy in something else and so on. But in my case, I was lucky that my family is always very closely involved in my career. I mean, my mother was traveling with me all the time till I was about 16, and then later would come for the big events. And so I grew up with this feeling of, and this is important because after a loss where you're disappointed, that has been very hard on you, but somehow you manage to keep a straight face, you go home, and then you need to vent. And then and typically this family member has to bear the brunt of it. So I remember with my mother, complaining a lot and this and that, and she patiently nods, and every family member understands that in the end there's nothing you can really say or do. You just have to sit there and listen, and the other person vents, and it's over. But in this sense, family is emotional support. Sometimes it's just a chance to disconnect. I mean, it sounds like my family is a tool to disconnect. That's not the case, but it has the practical effect of that.
I do just want to say that you refer to your honeymoon as the honeymoon tournament. Your wife went with you to a tournament for your honeymoon.
Yeah, well, in my defense, that tournament had been scheduled before the wedding had been scheduled, and the wedding had been scheduled because that was the only day the hall was available. So okay. So the same thing happened again with my wife, that she accompanied me everywhere. Pretty soon she decided, look, if I'm going to be traveling everywhere, then I can start managing some of your things so that you can focus on chess. And slowly she became more and more knowledgeable of the game, but more about what makes chess players tick rather than the actual variations. And then you'll see in the book that she's been a big part of everything. So for all my matches, she dealt with the contract, she dealt with the federations, everything. And this allowed me to completely disappear into chess. And so there is one nice story, just to tell you so I've finished some game, and I've lost it, and I'm very annoyed. And as someone who has tried to cheer me up after I've lost a game, she kind of decides not to do it this time. So we go for a walk, and I keep waiting for her to try to cheer me up, and she doesn't. And then I tell her, so what, you're not going to try to cheer me up? I mean, aren't you going to try and say something? Your usual, just calm down and play well, it'll be better tomorrow. She says, no, do you want me to? And I said, no, but you always do it, so. And she says, well, seriously, try to forget about this game and do well tomorrow. So then I tell her, well, it'll be more useful if you could tell me what I'm going to play tomorrow, because I don't know what I should play tomorrow, instead of this general advice. And so I say, if you have the refutation of the Berlin, that'll be more useful than this. And at this point, she can't take it anymore. And she says, if I knew the refutation of the Berlin, I wouldn't be married to you. So I hope that conveys the sense of what they go through. But
Okay, on that note, unfortunately, we are out of time. Anand will hopefully be signing books, and we can continue the conversation informally. Thank you so much for being here. I know we've just touched the tip of the iceberg of an extraordinarily accomplished life. Thank you for your time this evening, and thank you on behalf of us all for giving us a reason to be proud that we did not have before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for calling me a cult figure.
It's true.